do you want? Such a simple question, and yet not always a simple answer. What do you want? As I go through the following questions, I want you to take the time to think about your answers for yourself. What do you want for lunch today? What do you want to achieve by the end of the year? What do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want your life to look like 10 years from now? What do you want your legacy to be? When you're on your deathbed, thinking back to the things that you've done, what do you want others to have said about you? What do you want the impact that you made to have been? If the answers to these questions were hard for you, you're not alone. Most people never take the time to ask themselves these hard questions, to really dig deep down and ask themselves what they want from life. The problem with living like this is that when you don't think about what you want, you are at the mercy of what other people say, what other people do, and what other people want. And the problem with this is that your life is never your own. Standing here in front of all of you, I see a room full of potential leaders, creators, innovators, and builders. But potential is never enough. There's one thing you have to remember, and that is the only way to get what you want is to actually know what you want. Now, I'll tell you a bit about my story. But remember this as I go through it. Perfection. Perfection is something I worked towards my entire life. As the daughter of immigrants, I understood the high stakes of failure. As a student, I slaved for straight A's, but especially as a national champion gymnast, I mastered the art of perfection, from pointed toes to perfect posture and always the perfect position. Gymnastics brought with it prestige and perfect tens and applause, and boy, did it feel good. I was a shy child, and gymnastics gave me a stage upon which I could gain approval from coaches and judges and parents without ever saying a single word. I was good at being perfect. I was agreeable, I was hardworking, I was obedient, and so long as I kept my eye on the prize, my world was destined for perfection. By 2007, I'd earned the prize of 3-time US national champion. I had diligently checked off the boxes from state champion to regional champion to national champion to world champion to Pan Am champion, and now here I was nearly a decade later at the World Championships, the ultimate qualifier for the 2008 Beijing Olympic Games. I remember on that day, standing on the edge of the mat, prepared to do my final routine. Everything had been perfect up to that point. But this time, as the music crescendoed, so too did the volume of expectations in my head. This time, I remember looking out in the crowd and seeing the piercing gazes of the judges and the faces in the crowd, and feeling the pressure to achieve a decade-long dream. They say all it takes is a flash of doubt. And on that day, doubt determined my fate. Sure, I had been national champion for 3 years in a row, but when it came time to qualify for my Olympic dream, I stumbled. I ended up missing qualifying for the Olympic Games by a mere 0.25 tenths of a point. And on that day, everything I believed about myself shattered. I thought I wasn't good enough, I didn't work hard enough, I wasn't prepared enough. And that is the insidious nature of perfection. Nothing is ever enough. Enoughness. The only dictionary definition for this word is the state or condition of being enough. Sufficiency. Adequacy. But this definition, ironically, is not enough. A quick show of hands, how many of you have ever felt, I'm not smart enough, I'm not experienced enough, I'm not cool enough, I'm not making enough money, I'm not getting enough recognition? Everyone in this room. These are the feelings, these are the chips on our shoulders that drive us. But they're also feelings that come from deficiency, from scarcity. For me, I finally glimpsed what it meant to feel like enough just a few years ago, and I'll illustrate that with another story. A few years ago, I was biking, and I got to a really interesting art exhibit. I went into this art exhibit, and in this room, it was just big, sprawling white walls, and it was completely empty. But for the very back of the room, there were 6 large words in all capital letters, and they said, "Before I die, I want to." And in this exhibit, they had thrown markers all over the floors so that over the course of the next week, people could pick up these markers and write all the things that they hoped for before they died. So I came back a week later to see what had happened to these walls. And when I came back, I saw that people had written things, they'd written hopes for family, for love, for career, for legacy, but there was one inscription in the bottom left corner that caught my eye. It was so small, but all it said was, "Before I die, I want to make myself proud." And I thought about that when I went home that night, and for some reason, it didn't feel quite right. And it finally occurred to me what was wrong with that phrase. There is a significant difference between trying to make myself proud versus simply being proud of myself. And here's how I saw the difference. In the first scenario, imagine an empty bucket. This is your life. You are the empty bucket, and as you go through life, you keep filling up this bucket with all the things that society has told you will make you proud and make you happy. Fancy cars, job titles, money, great apartments, great clothes, whatever it is that society has said you should want. And as I thought about this, all the things I had done to try to make other people proud, thinking that that was actually trying to make me proud, I realized I'd thrown all these stuff in the empty bucket, and in my quest to achieve external metrics of success, at the end of the day, I was still just the empty bucket. the alternative scenario, now imagine a tree. Imagine a forest of trees, and now you are a tree, and this is your life. The tree is not trying to reach for all the other trees and take their fruit. Instead, it realizes that in order to grow taller and stronger, it needs to focus on its roots. And that's water, getting the right nutrients, connection to the earth, and connection to others. And as it's growing taller and stronger, it's not trying to make anyone else proud. It is simply proud of itself for being on its journey. It's simply proud of itself for being. And only when it grows tall and strong enough can it start to bear fruit for other people. So, it's important to ask yourself what your fears are. What are the fears that are driving you? Because so many of us achieve, and even when we successfully achieve our goals, we soon realize that success and enoughness do not come hand in hand. This empty bucket mentality is especially true for the overachievers, the perfectionists, the people that we think should have no problem having any issue feeling like they're enough. But the problem is, when we have this mentality, every subsequent success is not something to be celebrated. It is, in fact, just another proving ground to do more and more and more. So it's important to ask yourself this one question. How are you complicit in creating the situations you most fear? When I lost the Olympic Games, my biggest fear was failing. My biggest fear was letting other people down. My biggest fear was letting myself down. And yet that was exactly what happened, because I came from fear. I didn't come from abundance. So this brings me to the first important trait that all great leaders possess: self-awareness. Awareness is the ability to recognize within yourself the fears and desires that are motivating you. Because once you start becoming a leader, you are no longer responsible just for your own fears and your own dreams. You are suddenly responsible for the fears and dreams and experiences of everyone else. But at the end of the day, as a leader, you are driving the vision. Therefore, the only way to attain that vision is to know what you want. So back to that moment where I missed the qualification. At that moment, I had an important decision to make, because that same week, I received an acceptance letter to my dream university, Yale University in Connecticut. And I had to decide if I was going to quit gymnastics on that note or do something else. And so I thought to myself, well, at the end of the day, I'm certainly not a loser. And I most certainly am not a quitter. And so I did the hardest thing that I knew possible, and I told Yale I'm not coming. Not this year. Instead, I bought a one-way ticket to Russia. I went to the Russian Olympic Training Center in Novogorsk, the most rigorous training center in the world. Imagine Siberia in the middle of winter. And I committed to training for the next 9 months to become the best possible gymnast I could become. But for the first time, it was for no one else. It was for myself. It was for my own journey. And while I was there, 6 days a week, we'd wake up every morning, 6 a.m., have a small breakfast of stale white bread, a tomato, cucumber. They'd weigh us in the morning, we'd train for 4 or 5 hours, we'd have a quick lunch, they'd weigh us again, and then we'd train again for another 4 or 5 hours. So we were training 9 hours a day, and I did this almost every single day for the next 9 months, training, traveling, and competing across Europe. Until my final competition. 9 months later, I arrived at the USA National Championships in 2008, and there, I won every single gold medal, Athlete of the Year, got inducted into the Hall of Fame, and then I said, all right, peace. Now I'm out. So this brings me to the second trait that I believe all great leaders possess, and that's anti-fragility. Anti-fragility is the ability to grow stronger from the things that hurt you. Because your wound may not be your fault, but your reaction and your healing is your responsibility. Anti-fragility is the ability to fight for the things that you want. It is not enough to just know what you want. You actually have to be willing to go up again and again and again to fight for it, no matter how many roadblocks are in your way. So, after I retired from gymnastics and I entered the real world, I thought I was good. I started my first job at a hedge fund in New York, realized very quickly that I was not built for the corporate world. And I started my first venture. I started a food tech company and was able to get into a top accelerator, but then I went fundraising. I entered Silicon Valley, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, excited to go into the world of venture capital. And I remember in my first investor meeting, I walked in with my 35-year-old white male COO, and the investor walks over to him, shakes his hand, and brushes me off as the assistant. And it was in that instant that I realized that no matter how many things I had done, that perhaps it would never be enough. I realized that for the majority of women, it's not about some of the big, egregious stories we hear in the news. It's actually about the small paper cuts. Getting undervalued, overlooked, ignored, assumed as inferior. These are the paper cuts that really wear women down over time. And this time, I also didn't let myself wallow. I didn't get upset. I chose to do something. From that experience, I realized that I wasn't the only person going through it, and I wanted to be around other women who could empathize with the journey, but more importantly, I want to create a space for women to be able to build meaningful relationships with investors and get funded. Today, women still only receive 2.2% of overall venture funding. Women of color receive less than 0.2% of venture funding. I founded SheWorx with the mission to close the funding gap by collaborating and not competing. We've brought together over 20,000 female entrepreneurs to connect with the right investors, to gain the education, and to gain the mentors necessary to build successful companies. And so, as I was building this, I realized the most important thing that we were doing was changing the narrative. We were changing the narrative of what's possible because we live in a world that tells us we have to crush it, and we have to kill it, and we have to be great. And sometimes you just have to ask, how can I be great if I don't even feel like it's enough sometimes? When I discovered SheWorx, I discovered what I call the enoughness moment. The enoughness moment is the moment at which your own shame and insecurities begin to pale in comparison because you've realized that you have a duty to serve other people. I had spent a significant amount of my life being painfully introverted. Certainly not being able to speak in front of all of you today, feeling inadequate, feeling like I didn't deserve things, having this weird chip on my shoulder where I constantly felt like I had to prove something to others. And then I discovered that. I discovered that my duty to serve other people outweighed my own small insecurities. And so this brings me to the third trait that I believe all great leaders possess: abundance. Abundance is the ability to trust. To trust that what you know deep down is okay, it's right. And to trust that you can build a better future, that your voice, that your work matters. And that if you stick with it long enough, and you are certain about your mission, and you're certain that you're here to serve other people, that things will change. So, today we talked about awareness. From the beginning, I asked you an important question: what do you want? And now we know that this question, what do you want, doesn't really have a simple answer. But it is so important to take the time to ask yourself that question and know what you want, because the only way to get what you want is to know what you want. Anti-fragility. Once you know what you want, you actually have to fight for what you want, because no one else, at the end of the day, will fight for it except you. And abundance. The ability to not just know what you want and fight for what you want, but to actually trust that what you want is right. So, just remember this. Trust what you want, trust in your abilities to make it happen, and trust that that is enough. Thank you. I guess we can open it up for Q&A. If that's something that people would like. Thank you. Or I have a question. What did you guys learn from this presentation? What did you think about? Does anybody know what they want?
I just want to say thank you. I am so emotional right now. Stop, Sherry. I felt every word, and I was on a journey, and I stopped because I thought I wasn't good enough. But because of this presentation today, I'm going to go home, and I'm going to do what needs to be done, because I am enough.
You are.
Thank you.
I thought it was a terrific presentation, but I wanted you maybe to address the discipline it took, because you going to Russia and being there 9 months clearly showed that you were going to go and do whatever it took. So how do you relate that to everybody about being so disciplined in whatever they have to do to get to where you've even gotten, even outside of gymnastics?
I would say that one of the things I notice about a lot of people is that there are way too many priorities in their life. So a lot of times you wake up in the morning and probably your to-do list has about 20 items and maybe 100 emails in your inbox. So I think one of the things that I learned early on is that the ability to focus is the ability to say no to a lot of those priorities. They say, in the morning, wake up and write your top 3 priorities, and you should probably look at the third one and assume that it's not going to happen. So I think of it like that. When I was a gymnast, I had 2 priorities. I had gymnastics and academics. And those were really the only 2 priorities I had. And so as a result, I didn't go to parties, I didn't have a social life, I didn't have many friends, but I was able to justify that for myself because I knew what it would take to achieve, because I wanted it so badly. And I think it's really, there's learning how to cultivate what you want. It's like, if you want it badly enough, you'll fight for it, right? And you'll figure out the things you have to sacrifice and what you need to focus on. And I think that's just applicable to anything today, right? There's a lot of things that are superfluous and really just a waste of time. Well, my dad was a very hard worker, so he immigrated to the US when he was 28. My mom is one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. So I would say that part of them immigrating to the US and not coming from much, I think I definitely felt some sort of need to prove myself. And I saw how hard they worked to give me a better life, and so I think I felt like I had to fulfill that. But they always made sure that I was supported and happy.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for your presentation. I think for our generation, we're pressured to be the best, do your best, kill it, like you said. How do you shift that thinking every day from I'm not doing enough or I'm chasing something to what I've done is great, I'm living in this moment, I'm appreciating how far I've come, and yet I still have some way to go, but I'm not letting that pressure weigh me down? How do you shift your thinking? What do you do every day to fix that?
One of the questions that is important to ask yourself is this going to matter 5 years from now? Is it going to matter a year from now? And it's that ability to zoom out, which is also why I asked that question in the beginning, what do you want your life to look like 10 years from now? Because the reason why we react to things and we get so worked up by it is because we're so close to it, right? We see this thing and we feel the pressure and we feel like it's a life or death situation when really it's not. And so the ability to think about what's the goal, what's the thing you want to achieve, let's call it 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and will this particular crisis or this pressure or this decision really make a difference in the long term? And I think that's it's something I call metacognition, right? Metacognition is you are here and I'm experiencing whatever I'm experiencing and you're experiencing whatever you're experiencing. But sometimes you kind of rise above yourself and you observe as your 10 years away self, does this matter? Is this really as important or as much of a crisis as I think it is? And so what that does is it allows you to be a bit more present. And part of it is just simply having gratitude. And it's not just gratitude for other people and other things, but gratitude for yourself. So I'll give an example of an exercise that I did to help me with this. So you may have heard about something called the gratitude journal. And the gratitude journal is when you wake up every morning and you write down all the things that you are grateful for. And I did this for a month and I noticed a pattern, and that was every time I wrote what I was grateful for, it was for things like a warm bed, I'm grateful I live in New York, I'm grateful I have friends, I'm grateful I have family, but I was never grateful for myself. And so I flipped it the second month, and it wasn't just a gratitude journal, it was a gratitude for self, it was a self-gratitude journal. So I would say things like, I'm grateful that I've been able to overcome X challenges. I'm grateful that I've been a good friend. And you're not allowed to repeat the same things. So what I found myself after 30 days writing is small things was, I'm grateful that I held the door open for someone. You know, and then when you start noticing all the things that you're grateful for yourself, your internal dialogue starts to change. And so a lot of the things that you're talking about, this pressure, it's all internal, right? It's like you're pressuring yourself to feel like you have to do something. And you're pressuring yourself because you're caring too much what other people think. And so when you do this exercise, which is something that I recommend doing, you start focusing on all the great things about yourself. And that energy that you have within actually starts translating outside.
Wonderful presentation. That was very inspirational.
Thank you.
And a little gift from us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.